morning. I'm Cristina Rosas, and I am the head of the Olof Palme Center in Mexico. I would like to extend to you all a warm welcome to this webinar to analyze the impact of the US elections on North America. I would like especially to welcome our speakers, Ambassador Anthony Wayne, Ambassador Michael Kergin, and Ambassador Walter Astié. I would also like to express my gratitude to the Woodrow Wilson Center, particularly to the Mexico Institute and Dr. Duncan Good for providing his advisorship and expertise in order to make this webinar possible. The same goes to Dr. Stephen Randall, professor at Calgary University, who has also provided his input so that we can have this webinar. Thank you to you both. As I am sure you all know, well, once the victory of Vice President Biden was almost made known to the public, many governments congratulated Vice President Biden for his victory. One of the first leaders to do that was the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. On the opposite side, we have the President of Mexico, who decided not to do so for the time being, which of course provides a very interesting framework for the discussion we are about to have here. That explains why Ambassador Bárcena is not with us today. We still need to wait for some clarification from the Mexican government so that we can know what is going to happen. But after talking with Ambassador Bárcena, we agreed on inviting Ambassador Walter Astié, former ambassador to Washington, a very prominent member of our foreign service and an expert on Mexico-US relations. So I really want to thank Ambassador Walter Astié for joining us today on such short notice. That said, I would like to invite you all to know more about the Olof Palme Center. Those of you who are following on Facebook, give us a like, stay tuned. We are organizing several seminars on different issues of interest. Next Thursday, we will begin a second series of webinars on the impact of COVID on internal and external affairs. And the first session of next Thursday will be about the research on the vaccine made by Mexicans in Mexico. So I believe this is of critical interest to you. And without any further comment, let me hand the microphone to Steve Taylor from the Rio Grande Guardian, who will be the moderator for this session. Steve.
Maria Cristina, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm honored to be here with you again today for this really fascinating discussion that I'm sure we're going to have with our three experts. The title is The US Elections, Challenges and Opportunities for North America. And very pleased to welcome the ambassadors. We have Earl Anthony Wayne, who was the US ambassador to Mexico for a time. We have Walter Astié-Burgos, who is an ambassador, a former ambassador, and he's currently retired from the Foreign Office, but he's a professor at various Mexican universities. He's been a lecturer and a speaker on various topics related to Mexican foreign policy, culture, and Mexican history. And we have Michael Kergin, who is a former Canadian ambassador to the United States. So I'm happy for all three of you to make introductory remarks. I think we've agreed on that. We would like to hear from you all individually before I start to ask some questions. And to the audience, if you have any questions, please text them, type them in via Facebook, and we'll try to get to those further later in the show. But first of all, the three ambassadors, thank you so much for joining us. Earl Anthony Wayne, would you like to start with some introductory remarks?
Thank you very much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I'm going to talk about a little bit what changes we would see under a Biden administration. I think in general, we can expect to see US-Mexico and US-Canada relations put back into a strategic framework for strengthening cooperation and solving problems. And I think there'll be a long-term vision, which will be to maintain partnerships that have shared objectives, basically and broadly to keep North America secure and prosperous. I think we'll see a more consistent policy approach to Mexico and Canada. It will be less driven by individual issues and more concerned with achieving progress across a range of key objectives and goals, key subject areas. There will, I think, be a significant change in tone and attitude with an effort to treat both neighbors with respect and in the context of seeing them as long-term partners. It's a strong likelihood there'll be more regular consultations among leaders and at ministerial levels between each of the two bilateral pairs, and I think also across all of North America. I think we could expect some new U.S. proposals for strengthened institutional mechanisms to better achieve the shared goals and to monitor progress, and also to monitor progress in solving problems. And I think we'll see more attention returning to continent-wide problems and shared international problems where it's in the interest of the three countries to work together. President-elect Biden has already promised an early visit to Mexico to meet with Mexican President López Obrador. And he said he wants that to be to develop a joint economic and security strategy and to be seen as part of his undoing of the current administration's immigration policies. There are certainly going to be tough bilateral issues and continent-wide issues, but there should be a significant change in the rhetoric and the atmosphere across North America in dealing with those issues. I think we'll see more restraint from the United States in using tariffs or threatening tariffs, and there'll be a revived dialogue about working together on some of the regional issues and broader international issues also. Turning to the economic cluster of issues, it's important to remember that Vice President Biden oversaw the U.S.-Mexico high-level economic dialogue. That's a forum that ended under the Trump administration. But we should expect to see some kind of a revival of a U.S.-Mexico forum for managing economic relations beyond just trade. And of course, with the goal of solving problems, but also in light of seeking enhanced economic results over the medium and longer term. I think this is going to be the case with Canada too, and I think it will be reflected in more frequent ministerial consultations and probably more leader-level conversations also. In that sense, I think we could expect to see a proposal for a revival of the North American Leaders Summit, which last gathered together the leaders of the three countries in 2016. And we could see some proposals for enhancing the process that went into those leader summits previously. Regarding trade, I assume the new administration is not going to revisit the USMCA, as it's called in the United States, or TMEC in Mexico, and also has a version of the day with Canada first in Canada. But I think what there will be is continued attention and pressure on labor rights issues in Mexico, because there is strong support for progress in that area, certainly from Democrat members of the US Congress, as well as from US unions. But I think the focus is going to remain on implementing the agreement, not reopening it. Certainly in the very short term, if there's a Biden administration, there'll be a pause in the dispute process because of the transition. I think it's also important to note with the Biden team, they've announced economically there's going to be this idea of building back better, which will translate into substantial new investments and policy focus on empowering the US economy and restoring US competitiveness in the world. I think this really opens new opportunities for cooperation with both neighbors, given the high level of economic integration that already exists, both in production and commercial networks. And I think that we can see this process could very well be consistent with improving connectivity and productivity across North America, because one of the overarching aims here is to be able to compete more effectively with other economic powerhouse regions in the world and countries in the world, and particularly China. I think from a U.S.-Mexico perspective, a broader economic dialogue could help pull Mexico toward greater attention to what's needed to make Mexico more productive and competitive in the years ahead. I think Canada already has a forward-oriented focus on a number of issues, but that hasn't yet been as evident in Mexico. You know, we could see a North American dialogue taking up such issues as 5G networks, as more common cyber policies, as working together on workforce development, and also looking at cross-border infrastructure and better flowing transportation networks linking the key production regions. I think another area where there will be a different focus is energy and the environment. The Biden administration is going to put more focus on the environment and clean energy as part of that way to build back better and to generate economic growth while addressing climate change. So I think Mexico needs to expect that the U.S. is going to press for more attention to these concerns. We could see a proposal for restoring the North American energy dialogue, which functioned from about 2014 through 2017 and did a number of excellent things in the energy area. And I think we'd see a more focus in green energy issues if that takes place. And of course, what that means is there could be pressure for Mexico to make some adjustments, including looking in a different way than we've seen recently at renewables and at how much oil, polluting oil, is used. But we'll just have to see. On migration, I think it's quite clear a Biden administration is not going to focus on building a border wall and is going to emphasize a much more humanitarian approach to treating asylum seekers and migrants. But a Biden administration will not want to be confronted by a new migrant crisis at the southwest border. I suspect they're going to continue to expect Mexico to assume its responsibility for humanely controlling migrant flows through Mexico. And I think we're going to see more willingness on the U.S. part to invest in addressing the root causes that are pushing migrants to leave the Northern Triangle countries in Central America. This, of course, was an initial proposal of Andrés Manuel López Obrador to President Trump, but President Trump never bought into that approach. Biden, however, oversaw the U.S. response to the 2013-2014 surge of Central American migrants heading north. And he oversaw the effort to get additional U.S. monies to invest and then to get those three countries to be more serious about that. Now, of course, what that means is he knows there's no short-term fix here and that there are serious weaknesses in the ability of those Northern Triangle countries to deliver, and also institutional weaknesses in Mexico for handling migration. The final area I'll mention is public security. And this has been an up and down process of cooperation over the past several years, highlighted by the shocks of the arrest in the United States of a former defense secretary. For a number of years, the framework and processes for security cooperation has needed serious review. The Mexican government has not been open to that kind of a serious review of how the cooperation goes on. I think Biden will recall that while he was vice president, the White House played a key role in managing U.S.-Mexico public security and anti-crime cooperation. And I suspect his team will want to have a fresh look at how we're working against criminal cross-border groups. So, and then finally, just to mention, I think a Biden administration is going to pay much more attention to issues of human rights, democracy, dealing with corruption. And I think that will be a change from in priority from the Trump administration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. That was quite a roadmap you laid out there for the next. Thank you so much for that. Walter, do you want to go next with your introductory remarks?
Myself?
Please.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for this kind invitation that, as Maria Cristina already said, was a last-minute invitation, but here I am, very pleased to be here. Well, I must say that I personally am very happy, I'm very glad, and I'm sure there's millions of Americans that also are very happy and very glad. There's millions of Mexicans that are very happy and very glad, and millions of the people in the world for the recent results of the elections in the United States. So I think we all welcome the election of Mr. Biden as the new president, and that it goes to say that we are very pleased that Mr. Trump was not re-elected. And that's our really good news. And also we are very glad and happy, and that's a good example for the world, that we are very pleased to see the permanent commitment of the American people to democracy and democratic processes like elections. And that's a very good sign of. Well, what we're going to see is a big change, and I think it's going to be a big change for good. There's going to be some problems, as Ambassador Wayne already mentioned, and I will come back to that. But obviously, we welcome a new attitude, not only in the bilateral relations or the trilateral relations in North America, but a more sane and constructive way of conducting international relations, because the problems have not been just in North America, also with Europe and all over the world. So this is a new era, and we welcome that. In the field of bilateral relations, well, a big change is going to take place, as I already mentioned, and it's not going to be easy, because although that our President López Obrador was able to accommodate to Mr. Trump in order to avoid problems, more frictions, or whatever, well, it was more than anything, was a very personal relation, not really a relation between the structure of the two governments of the two countries, but a personal relation, and that will disappear. One important issue, as Ambassador Wayne already said, is that in the last 4 years, we have forgotten the concept, the idea of North America. It didn't exist anymore. With the idea of America First of President Trump, we just forgot North America. And we have to remember that even in some moments, the backbone of this concept of North America, that is the free trade agreement, was about to disappear. And in one moment, there were just negotiations, bilateral negotiations between the United States and Mexico, excluding Canada. And so we are happy to see that probably there was going to be a new impulse to the concept, the idea of North America, because we all need it in this new world. And I think Mr. Biden is very much into that direction. In other issues, Ambassador Wayne already mentioned, we hope that it is going to be a good relation, but there are going to be very bumpy issues, because the ideas or policies of Mr. López Obrador do not always coincide with the ideas or policies of Mr. Biden. He already mentioned, well, clean energy, or if you want human rights, democracy, environment is a big issue, security, and all that. As you know, the bilateral relations of Mexico are very intense and very deep. From my point of view, they are beyond being bilateral. They are not bilateral anymore. They are binational. And because they are enormous, they are very big and very complicated. And during the Trump administration, many of those important issues of this binational connection have been forgotten. And well, everything was concentrated in very few issues like the renegotiation of the free trade agreement, migration, some small things in security, but other many important issues were not dealt because they were not in the agenda of President Trump. So that will come back to have a larger, a bigger agenda in a trilateral way. Also, I must say that I'm a little sad about the fact that from the Mexican side, in the last 2 years, Canada has been not existing at all in the agenda for foreign policy. And so, well, with this change in the United States, probably Canada will become an important actor as it was becoming to be since 1944 that we signed the free trade agreement. So we all hope for the best, but we can discuss that later on, there's many issues that there's not a very good coincidence with the ideas that Mr. Biden has and those ideas that have been promoted by our president. And of course, I think, and this is not a secret, that Democrats are not really very happy with Mr. López Obrador. Because if we remember at the beginning of the year, it was the powerful Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, who now, since next year, she's going to become more powerful than what she used to be. She said that because issues related to migration and the renegotiation of the free trade agreement, that President López Obrador was playing to support or for the re-election of President Trump. And of course, this idea, well, became more clear when we have this strange, peculiar visit of our president in August to the White House, when we all said that it was not prudent to do it because it was in the middle of the electoral and very polarized process, and he decided to go. And then, well, his speech in the White House about sending flowers to the work of Mr. Trump and all that, that was not very well welcomed by the Democrats. And worst, as already Maria Cristina said, this strange thing in the last days that our president doesn't want really to congratulate, to send a message, any kind of message to the election of Vice President Biden, well, it's not a good sign. And we do not, honestly, in Mexico, we do not understand what is the reason why he's doing in that. It's not a matter of recognizing or not recognizing the government, because that's an internal domestic issue. But he can send some kind of formal protocolarian message in the sense that, well, I'd like you to be the new president and all that. But he has not done that, and that is, well, that's creating more, not a very good atmosphere for the beginning of the relations between the two countries. But then let's see what is going to happen next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Very good remarks there. And Michael Kergin, Ambassador Kergin, your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Steve. And again, a pleasure to be with everybody for this important discussion. It's no secret to anybody, I don't think, that if one were taking a poll in Canada, you know, weeks, months, years before the election, or at least a year anyway, when we knew that Biden was the nominee for the Democratic Party, the polling was about 70–75%, hoping that Mr. Biden would be the next president of the United States. We've had a fairly scratchy relationship, particularly Mr. Trudeau, with Mr. Trump. Some personal bumps and grinds, but also concerns about the way the USMCA, or CUSMA, as Tony put it in Canada, the Canadian-US-Mexico trade agreement, had been implemented, with tariffs put on steel and aluminium for national security reasons, which obviously did not apply in terms of the integration of our two markets. And since when has Canada been a national security threat to the United States? So we've had some difficulties with the president, largely President Trump. Unpredictability, impetuousness, and that makes it difficult to have a working relationship. And so as a result, Mr. Trudeau was first out of the starting gate. I think CNN had announced from their perspective the results of the election. Within 30 seconds, somebody hit the start button for Mr. Trudeau to send a tweet congratulating Mr. Biden. Some of us traditionalists thought that was getting out a little ahead, perhaps a touch opportunistic, but nevertheless, that was the right thing politically to do as far as Canada was concerned. And then Trudeau and the president-elect had a conversation yesterday by telephone where they talked about trying to work together on COVID-19, to work together carefully and closely on environmental issues, and also looking forward to having a good working relationship between the two countries. It won't all be wine and roses, because most important part of our relationship with the United States actually is the trade and investment part. And while we do have USMCA in place, and I think probably will be more predictable implementation of that agreement, we do see some concerns relating to what will probably be, if Congress so permits, heavy U.S. government investments into manufacturing for reshoring, manufacturing from abroad, into renewable energy, and into infrastructure. And traditionally, our problem for some of these has been the application of Buy America, where understandably these investments paid for by U.S. taxpayers are aimed at procuring goods and services and employment in the United States. And given the interrelationship between our economies, we find sometimes that Canadian companies are not allowed to bid on these projects. So this conversation for me is a good one, because it's stressing a lot the North American, and Tony Wayne talked a lot about that, North America as an economic entity. So I think our people will be working hard to try and change Buy America to Buy North America, to try and ensure that as investments are made in a COVID-19 economic renewal, which I think all three countries will be having to invest fairly heavily in to stimulate their economies, that these investments are seen as North America-wide and are not seen as prohibitive in terms of procurement in the other two partners of North America. We're in Canada very pleased about Mr. Biden, or Biden, the President-elect's environmental agenda, recognizing that a number of the issues that Mr. Trump put in by executive order will be probably reversed fairly quickly. One that does concern us a little bit is we have a pipeline that we're trying to construct from Alberta, from the oil sands, the environmentalists will call them tar sands, to send oil down through to Louisiana refineries. And it's a Keystone XL pipeline. Mr. Trump, when he was elected, Mr. Obama, I should say, did not allow a permit to go through to allow that pipeline to go across the border. Mr. Trump reversed that, and he provided the permit. The pipeline has been caught up a little bit in some judicial issues in the state of Nebraska, but it's pretty clear that Mr. Biden will rescind or withdraw that permit, and that will probably cause a few problems with our oil-producing province of Alberta. And I think the federal government's already in an effort to sort of suggest to Mr. Biden that the integration of our energy production and distribution and utilization, it would be best to have that pipeline, that permit to be continued. That to me is going to be a long shot, given that an important part of the Democratic Party is very heavily environmentally focused, and this would be a low-hanging fruit for Mr. Biden to do to satisfy some of the environmentalists in his party. Other than that, to talk a bit about the Ambassador Astié's points about international, certainly Mr. Biden's foreign policy objectives seem to be very much in line with Canadian policies and practices. We'll be very pleased if the president, president-elect, when he becomes president, would rejoin the Paris Agreement on climate change. We're hoping to work with the United States, and I think Mexico, on reforming the World Trade Organization. The Trump administration did its best to undercut the WTO. There are problems with the WTO, but Canada has led an effort to try and reform the appellate aspects of the WTO, and that's something which we want to work closely with the new administration on. We're very pleased. We think that Mr. Biden will be traditional in supporting the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and with also an important objective for Canada, which is non-proliferation, that he will likely, with President Putin, agree to the renewal of the strategic arms reduction talks for another 5 years. Finally, I'd just say that the President-elect's emphasis on human rights, rule of law, democratic institutions, the call for a summit of democracies to strengthen world democracies are right up the Canadian line. We will be wanting to work very closely with the United States on that. And as a kind of a parallel to that, maintaining a pretty tough line against the authoritarian regimes in China, dealing with Uyghurs. We have our two Michaels who have been held hostage in China as a consequence of our holding on to a senior official of the Huawei telecommunications company. We've been having difficulties with North Korea and increasing authoritarianism in Turkey and Saudi Arabia. So we are expecting that Mr. Biden will take a fairly more robust line in dealing with some of these authoritarian regimes and the rolling back of the rule of law, human rights, and democratic institutions. But always caveats, Mr. Biden, I think all friends of the United States, of the new administration when it comes in, have to exercise patience. Mr. Biden has big domestic priorities to heal the huge divide in the United States. That'll be his first priority, I think, over foreign policy issues. You'll have apparently a non-compliant Senate. We'll see how those races go in Georgia, possibly a hostile judiciary. So he will have a difficult time managing it. So my advice to anybody who cares to listen in Canada is patience, discretion, and lowered expectations until Mr. Biden is able to establish himself in the White House. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very in-depth remarks there, Ambassador Kergin. Thank you very much for that. So let me start to ask some questions. This one first for Tony Wayne. I think we should start, obviously, with COVID-19, Ambassador. Given that it's so prevalent in the United States and across North America, the incoming Biden administration or the transition team is already working on this. The president-elect has named this working group. And is there anything you see in what he's planning to do in putting science first and listening more to the medical professionals, the doctors? Is there anything he's doing for the United States that has implications across North America as a whole? And I'm reminded that one of your colleagues at the Mexico Institute, Duncan Wood, put out a paper with some colleagues on how the US and Mexico could work together more closely on public health. Is there anything in a Biden presidency focusing on COVID that could also be extended in better working relationships with Canada and Mexico?
Well, I think the fact that he has established a truly science-based advisory committee and made clear that he's going to focus on the science opens up the door for very solid technical collaboration across both borders. And there is space for developing a common health approach, in a sense, health passports, maybe you would call it, something that respects the highest level of scientific practice and still allows that the communication to take place. And I think there's a big space there to do that with both countries. And I think it'll be important for building confidence. I've certainly seen the newspaper reports from Canada suggesting a lack of confidence about our own practices in the United States. So I think having these professional scientific dialogues to come up with better practices. And implementing those, of course, in the United States will make a big difference at the border, open up some new possibilities. I think similarly with Mexico, there's a lot that could be done. And this could be part of a broader dialogue that ties into the economy and competitiveness also. Because if we get the supply chains all working with better worker health, better health checks on everybody and practices, the quicker we can get those supply chains working, both within the United States more safely, but also across the borders across North America. So I think there's a lot of possibilities opened up. And I'm sure, though, as Michael correctly said, the big focus is going to be domestic initially. But I'm sure that there's going to be an openness to having dialogue with both countries on best health practices as we move forward.
Thank you. Sticking with COVID-19, Ambassador Astié-Burgos, how are things in Mexico right now, with regard to COVID-19, and can you see anything changing because of a Biden presidency in your approach, in your country's approach to COVID?
Well, you see, the situation of the pandemic problem in Mexico is very bad. Not as bad as it is in the United States, but here in Mexico also it's very, very bad. And unfortunately, well, the policy of our president has been very similar to the policy of Trump, starting with not using the mask, not enforcing really strict measures to avoid social contact and all that. So we are facing a difficult situation, and it's going to be worse in the future. So we were very pleased to see that the first announcement of Mr. Biden was to put the emphasis in the pandemic problem as the point number one in his agenda. That should be the case, okay? Because this is the worst problem we are facing right now. In Mexico, it's not considered to be the main topic, the main issue for the agenda of the government, unfortunately, and we are paying a very high price on that. We will welcome, because the only way to stop this pandemic crisis across the world is the cooperation among countries or between countries. Otherwise, I mean, the contagious thing goes from Mexico to the United States, or from the United States to Mexico, and then from Canada, all of that. We do not have a common policy in many issues like drug trafficking. The problem is that we have a big cooperation, if you want, but I mean, the United States does things as they want to do them, and Mexico does its own things, and there's not just one common policy to face a common problem. And that happens in all the world. I mean, one of the reasons why we have this terrible pandemic crisis is because we haven't had a common international policy to fight against this illness. And here is the problem. Obviously, I think that being the priority for Mr. Biden, when he takes office, he's going to approach Mexico and to propose something that we could do in common to fight this crisis. And I hope that our government would be receptive to that, because we need it, because things are not working properly in Mexico. So we need to strengthen the cooperation with the United States to solve the problem.
Thank you. And Ambassador Kergin, I've got another question for you, but is there anything else you would like to add about the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, only very briefly, Steve. I mean, confidence in how a government is managing the crisis is critical from a political point of view. And I say that because our border with the United States has been closed, except for essential traffic, since April. And again, in polling, 75% of Canadians are in favor of that, even if it means dividing families. And I know from personal experience, funerals, emergencies, and health issues and so forth, that border is very, very closed. So I think Canadians are concerned that the United States has not managed the crisis properly. We have our own problems on COVID, I first admit that. But because we lack confidence in the way the United States is managing it, this administration in Washington, there's quite a lot of popularity to keep our borders closed with the United States, and that'll stay there for some time until perhaps Mr. Biden gets in and has a national plan on masking and so on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. Back to Ambassador Wayne. Let's talk more about immigration. I've heard and read lots of articles and heard commentators say that could be one of the biggest changes we'll see with a Biden presidency. What do you think the US will do with regard to the Remain in Mexico policy that's affecting us here on the southwest border, the US-Mexico border, and the possibilities internally in the United States of comprehensive immigration reform?
Well, I think that there are a range of options that we're going to see the new government undertake. Immediately, I think we're going to see a reversal of a number of the executive order-based and administrative order-based steps, instructions to DHS and others, and I think you'll get new instructions to HHS and to the Health and Human Services, to the Department of Justice, asylum judges and asylum cases. And the way to Mexico issue is going to be a very serious issue to address. I'm sure there will be a priority put on addressing those asylum requests quickly and in respect to international norms that the United States has signed up to. I think that the biggest change, you'll see also the changes of the treatment of the so-called the young people, the DACA recipients who are in the United States. There'll be an effort to give them some certainty as to their future. The problem on a number of steps will be to see what the majority looks like in the Senate, because some of those fixes, both in the short term and if you're going to have a broader comprehensive reform, are going to need new legislation. And that will be harder, not impossible, but harder if there's a Republican majority in the Senate. I do think there'll be a focus on talking with the Mexicans right away to treat people, Mexican authorities, to treat people more humanely on both sides of the border. I think there'll be an effort to shift the staffing and focus away from the purely enforcement, also to the reception and the management of people when they come to get rapid treatment to their claims. But there's no question that even in previous administrations, there were big flaws in our asylum process. There was several years wait in several cases to get cases heard, and that does need to be fixed. So I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't an effort to readjust funding priorities to address some of those questions. As I said, I think there'll also be an interest in trying to work in a bit different way with the governments of Central America and Mexico in the South. I don't necessarily think it's going to be seen as bad that you focused on improving enforcement capacities in all places, because during the time that Mr. Biden was vice president, there were still a large number of deportations, and there was still an argument that you needed to obey the law. But there's a humanitarian way to do that, a way that respects, as some people would say, human rights, as we would say in the United States, civil liberties. And I think there'll be a focus on doing that. And I think there'll be another interest in targeted investments in Central America, and perhaps even in southern Mexico, to help improve that capacity. Those aren't going to be fast fixes, though. That will take a while. What can happen is the attitude and the treatment on the border. And you could see some U.S. investment on both sides of the border, depending on how the conversations go between the two governments.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's stick with immigration if we can, Ambassador Astié-Burgos. Does anything that the incoming Biden administration plans to do, does that influence Mexican policy with regard to your immigration enforcement, your security issues, your decision, your acceptance of U.S. policy as it was under Trump of receiving all these Central Americans on the border. Does anything change in Mexico, do you think, because of the changes coming in the US?
Well, of course, that depends a lot of what the new government of Mr. Biden is going to propose. But as it has been said, this is going to be one of the main issues because it has been the main issue since 50 years ago, and there's no solution. And the problem is that we always have found or implemented short-term solutions to the problem according to the needs of the president of the government in turn. But we don't have found long-term solutions. And what we have between López Obrador and Trump was, you see, a provisional solution that Mexico had to pay a big price for that. Because in order to not to have problems with Mr. Trump, López Obrador did what he wanted to do in terms of migration. And then we have already in the border, because with this idea that in order to provide asylum, they have the migrants to remain in Mexico, we have around more than 60,000 migrants in the border. And that's a time bomb in terms of pandemic problem, you see? Nothing has happened, but could happen. We have to reach the point that both countries, we have to look to the roots of the problems in order to have a long-term solution to this issue. And the solution is, well, what to do in order to make that people stay where they are born and they live and they work. And then this is an economic problem. And one of the ideas of the free trade agreement was exactly to push the development of Mexico so that Mexicans stay in Mexico and they don't have to travel illegally to the United States. So we have to focus on that. And also, Ambassador Wayne mentioned, we have the problem of Central America. That is exactly the same problem. The roots of the problem have not been tackled. You know, if you have some assistance, some money, some aid here, you know, short-term solutions. But I mean, how to stop this enormous flux of migrants from Central America? Well, Mexico and United States and Canada also have to do something to develop Central America so people stay there. And it's not only an economic problem in Central America, it's also a political problem because the governments they are really, well, very authoritarian, very corrupt. They are not, I was for 3 years and a half ambassador of Mexico in Honduras. So I know the problem very well. So that those governments or those presidents they really do not respond to the needs of their population. So I hope that from the new administration in Washington comes new ideas on how to solve the problem, but with a view that has to be a long-term solution and not another short-term solution to save the face for the moment, with probably, as it has been in the case of Mr. Trump, with electoral aims and not really with the idea of solving the problem.
Thank you. And Ambassador Kergin, immigration from a Canadian perspective.
Well, our bilateral situation with the United States was just one element of this and not nearly as important in numbers, but we concluded an agreement with the United States about a decade or so ago in which it was decided by both countries that where somebody came into, let us say, the United States and declared refugee status, they would then have to be dealt with as a refugee in the United States. This is because a number of people who were declaring refugee status then started to drift up and go across to the Canadian border. Why? Because apparently our settlement provisions were more generous than in the US and so on. So we're having quite a lot of refugees coming across the border who actually declared refugee status in the United States. So in order to fix that problem, we had this arrangement with the United States. What's interesting is that over the last 4 years, human rights groups in Canada have gone to our courts and saying that the way the US Homeland Security are dealing with refugees in terms of their detainment and treatment and so forth is a violation of their human rights. And therefore, the agreement with the United States to return these people to the U.S. Is a violation of their human rights. And of course, that doesn't sit well on our bilateral relationship with the United States to accuse the United States of not dealing with people in a human rights way. So it's been a bit of a problem with the United States. And also because we've been getting a number of Haitians and Caribbean, not Mexicans or Central Americans, but refugees from third world countries coming to Canada across the border in the middle of winter. They are, people who are in very bad shape and so on. And so we're probably now on a sense that under a Biden administration, the chances are that the treatment of people who have declared refugee status in the U.S. will probably improve, and therefore court challenges as to the treatment being a violation of the human rights may not pass muster. But that remains to be seen, and it'll be very important to see how DHS in the future deals with detainees and people who are declared refugees in the United States.
Thank you. We probably only have 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so more to go if we're to keep within our timeline guidelines. So I'm going to go across now to some of the questions that have come in. Destiny Buhanda asks, in terms of maquiladoras on the frontera, what's the future of these international companies? Will we see more or less of them? Ambassador Wayne, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. I think that with the framework of USMCA, there is a great potential for more investment in Mexico to add to the production chains and commercial chains that already exist. There is going to be a look from the Biden administration to make sure that worker rights are being respected in those maquiladoras, which should be a good thing for the workers and a good thing for Mexico. It won't be easy to have that process go forward, but Mexico is implementing very, very serious reforms right now in the labor rights area. But the potential for enhanced investment is there. Mexico, however, needs to actually portray an inviting investment climate for people to move that investment in large numbers. And sadly, from a Mexican perspective, there have been a number of mixed signals over the past year. Most of them come out of the energy sector, where the president of Mexico and his party have a different look at the value of private sector investment in the energy area. But what that does in part is it sends worrisome signals to other investors. So what you really need on the part of Mexico, I think, is a serious campaign to show that new investment is welcome, to have concrete steps to entice people to come and assure them that their investments are going to be secure if they come into Mexico.
I'll bring the other two ambassadors in a moment, but there's another question for you, Ambassador Wayne, and that is from Diego Marroquin. Moving forward, would a broader dialogue with the US help Mexico go back to its previous commitments to renewable energy investment, or is that a lost cause?
I think a broader dialogue would help on a number of fronts in the economic area. The economic relations between Mexico and the United States, and between Canada and the United States, are not just about trade. It's about investment, it's about border infrastructure, it's about promoting joint use of technology, joint regulation across the range of issues. And so, yes, a broader dialogue is really good. Secondly, Mexico has tremendous potential in the renewables area. It's in the top 10 of potential areas from the United States. I mean, from the world, if you look at the, in the world listing of potential for renewables. So there's a tremendous amount of gain if Mexico can find a way within their policy to keep those doors open and keep that potential going. Right now, there had been an effort to change the regulations in the renewable energy electricity sector. That's now in the courts in Mexico, with a number of the investors that were already there questioning the government's regulation. I do think that Mexico is putting aside a great opportunity to have tremendously valuable investment, and there's a lot of market for that in the United States. In California, for example, there's a legal mandate that a certain proportion of their energy supply has to come from renewables. So that's a market for northern Mexico that's sitting right there that they could start benefiting from in the near term. And I think if we have a broader dialogue, I think that could encourage consideration of these great opportunities for Mexico. And I think there will be that dialogue with the Biden administration.
Let's pass this next question over to Walter. Maricruz Amador asks via Facebook, do you expect the Democrats to take any punishment, to impose any punishment against Mexico for López Obrador's support for President Trump?
Yeah. Well, you see, the nature of what I call the binational relations between the two countries is so big, it's so powerful, it's so complicated that it's very difficult that the policies of the two governments in turn of the two presidents will affect it. Well, could be affected, but somehow not really very substantive harm to that enormous collaboration and the changes and links that we have and all that. But obviously, and Ambassador Wayne already mentioned two issues that are going to be very touchy. And there's not going to be an easy way to find agreement. That the energy, because our president has the idea that he would like to go back to the previous century, putting the emphasis on oil and all that. And then you have the problem of investment, that there's not enough trust in the policies, in the very contradictory policies of the present government, that he says that he would like to welcome foreign investment, but things that he does shows that he's not really in favor of private investment, etc. So we want to have problems. Now, because of that, and what the Democrats make the interpretation that López Obrador had been supporting the reelection of Trump, it makes that they are not going to be very happy in their dealings with Mexico. And then these issues, these problems will arise again. So there's not going to be really very harsh things against the government of López Obrador, because that would affect the relation, and then the losers are going to be the Americans and the Mexicans. But there's going to be a very cool attitude towards Mexico. They are not to be so close as we remember where President Salinas de Gortari and George Bush's father. No, there's going to be a very tense, cordial, but not close relationship. If it's not that our president changes his policies, but I mean, he is very, well, difficult to change, I would say, because he's very much like Trump, unfortunately, but that's the point. So we'll see, but there's going to be serious problems. Not a war between, and we're not going to break the relation, diplomatic relations, things like that, because it's impossible. But the relations are going to be bumpy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Ambassador Kergin, I'd like to go back to a comment Walter made earlier in the webinar, when he said that because of Trump's America First policy, that we've all forgotten the concept of a North America. Do you think anything will change with regard to Canada's working relationship with Mexico because of a Biden presidency? Your thoughts on diplomatic relations for North America, but if the Biden administration is not putting America first, that's obviously a debatable point. But the whole concept of North America, is that going to be improved vis-a-vis Canada and Mexico?
I think it will, Steve. You know, relations between leaders are important. because they inform kind of how bureaucracies prioritize different files and so forth. And if you have a scratchy relationship and you've got something you want and it's in the White House, it'll just go down in the bottom of the in basket for a while. And so that's kind of important. And I fear that the relationship with between Mr. Trudeau and López Obrador has not been the best. We in Canada always are very keen in the United Nations, as you know, and we ran a campaign, a lost campaign for the Security Council. But I think our people were rather upset because it turns out that Mexico did not support the Canadian candidates in the Security Council, which was for us a bit of a surprise, being a North American sort of trying to look at the world in a collectivity. And that was an important file for us, even if it was a lost cause. So I think there needs to be some fence building here. Ambassadors can be very helpful for that. Obviously, between the countries, Mexico and Canada, there are some very important substantive and functional relationships that that can continue. We have very good investments in Mexico, and Mexico is a very important investor in Canada. So the private sector will have to work on that to try and move the governments, I think, a little bit to try and reknit a few of these strands that have kind of frayed a little bit over the last 3 or 4 years. Obviously, President Biden, if he takes a leadership role in North America, we will be right there with him, and we'll work hard to make that a good trilateral relationship. But it will need a little bit of a push, I think, from the White House to do that, as far as I can judge it from the outside.
Great. Well, we're coming close to the end of the program here, so I'd like just to ask each of you just for some closing remarks, just a couple of minutes each, if you will, and before we all sign off. And let's start with Ambassador Wayne. Any last thoughts?
Well, I think with a Biden administration, there's going to be a real opportunity for reviving a broad dialogue with both neighbors and then across North America on a set of key issues. And people are going to look at the interrelationship between these issues, and they're going to be more willing to look at what Michael was just talking about, Ambassador Kergin was just talking about, a North America approach. There will be tensions between the Invest in America, Build Back Better, but I think there's enough synergy that we can find a compatible way to go forward and address more consistently what are the key issues between these neighbors that are so intertwined. I like to use the term intermestic when I talk about both of our neighbors, meaning that they're both international and domestic at the same time. And when you don't have that perspective, you take a big chance of missing really important opportunities and not solving problems. And I think a Biden administration will see that connection. And so that opens the door for a lot of possibilities.
Thank you very much. And Walter, your closing remarks, the challenges and opportunities for North America with this new president.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of hope that things are going to be much better. And I think there's going to be a much better and good understanding between Canada and the United States under the new administration of President Biden. The problem I see is the relations with Mexico. The common interest is there, but the ideological thing is going to separate Biden from López Obrador and from Mr. Trudeau and all that. But we have to remember something that a former US ambassador that was not very positive in Mexico, John Gavin, the actor, he said that the relations are like a marriage without the possibility of divorce. And we have to be realistic in that way, that we are there. Geopolitics, history, economy, whatever. And then it's something that we have to deal and to work out to have a better and more cooperative relation for the good of both countries. And so I really hope that our president will change his attitude, and the way he was able to accommodate with Trump, I hope that he will find a way to accommodate with the new presidency of Mr. Biden.
Thank you very much. And Ambassador Kergin, your closing remarks.
This probably won't surprise you coming from a long-standing bureaucrat, but institutional linkages, I think, are really, really important. And we've let those fray badly, I think, in the three-way relationship. Regular meetings of ministers of environment, or meetings of ministers of energy, agriculture, and so on. And trying to rebuild some of those more institutional linkages, I think will have a good impact on business, because business in the end, economics and investment are things that do drive relationships in an important way. And again, the North American Forum, which is a mixture of former bureaucrats, corporate heads, and important citizens, has sort of frayed a little bit because of this lack of glue that allows us to get together and develop these relationships. So I was very encouraged by what Tony had to say, that his sense of it is that the United States is quite keen to try and build some of these things back. We have to help the United States from our side, obviously. And if we can do that, I think I'd have a more sort of optimistic view of North America as an entity, as opposed to three countries each reaching out to the rest of the world individually.
Thank you very much. And before we go, I've been asked to remind everyone that the Olof Palme Center is on all the social media platforms, so check them out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Very important that we all follow the work being done at the center, and to say thank you to the ambassadors, the three experts that we've really enjoyed listening to today. It's been very informative. I hope our audience has learned a lot, as I have. Ambassador Wayne, Ambassador Astié-Burgos, and Ambassador Kergin, thank you all very much. And am I now passing it back to Maria Cristina?
Thank you, Steve. I just want to say thank you to you, ambassadors. It's been a very interesting session, and I hope we can have these debates more often. I think it's necessary. I believe that part of the relevance of the scenarios we are facing is that we may be recovering the sense of a North American community that has been lost under Trump. So I'm really happy to hear Ambassador Kergin, Ambassador Wayne, and Ambassador Astié-Burgos, because that, at least in this academic forum, is providing a sense of North America. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for organizing this.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.